I really wanted to get on here to do a video that was requested of me quite some time ago, so I apologize for the delay, but I thought it was a really important topic that I have addressed a little bit in some of my videos about nervous system regulation and mindset, but maybe not quite as specifically or in depth, and that is, how do you deal with shame when you are an overachiever? So stay tuned for that. I do just want to say a couple things about what is going on at Whole Body Healing this month. So I am going to be giving a free webinar on nutrients needed for mental thriving, and that's going to be this Friday, August 11th at noon Pacific time. So it's just a free webinar. You can sign up for it, and I will include the link in the summary for this video, and so make sure that you sign up for that. If you sign up for it, you will get free access to the mini course that I'm going to be releasing the week after with the same content, of course, with even more in-depth information. I think that is really relevant to the topic today, since obviously being an overachiever tends to contribute or exacerbate maybe other mental health issues or existing mental health issues. If you have that personality type, it's going to exacerbate potentially symptoms of anxiety or low self-worth or things like that. And so it's really important that we address those thinking patterns for sure. And I will be talking about that because I would argue that our thoughts are a nutrient in a way, right? But we're also going to be talking a lot about nutrition because there are some baseline resources that our body needs to have mental health, to have a healthy and thriving brain. And I think this is essential information that everyone should have the access to. So I'm going to be giving that webinar this Friday. And after that, stay tuned because Suzanne, who has been on a couple of my YouTube videos recently and is just doing incredible work with her clients and with families, she is going to be hosting her first free webinar on August 24th. So stay tuned. I will be announcing signups for that next week. So that is what is going on this month. My immune resilience August cohort is closed for applicants. It is a full cohort, and I will likely be opening my next one between October and January. So stay tuned for that. If you want to be on the waiting list and get first dibs, you can email me directly and request that. Now, on to this topic. I loved this question, and every time I talk about personality traits that go along with people who have chronic illness, I always want to be careful because I'm certainly not trying to stereotype anyone, and I'm certainly not trying to overgeneralize, right? There's always exceptions here. When I'm talking in broad terms, just take it as that, like a generalization. There's always going to be exceptions. But these are patterns that I see. I certainly see them in myself. So part of this is me calling myself out, right? Because I fit into these patterns as well. And I see this over and over and over again in my clients. So not only people who develop chronic illness, but also people who tend to have more complex or difficult to resolve chronic illnesses, who stay really stuck in their symptoms for years or decades, right? There tend to be some consistencies. Now, one of those potentials is someone who has a very perfectionist, overachieving personality type, right? A lot of people who are like gifted and talented in school, right? Or prodigies of some kind of thing. Maybe they were athletes, or competitive in some way, or were in advanced classes or skipped a grade, or, just were always considered kind of the smart one. And people who really feel like they have to constantly perform to be worthy, right? They have to constantly please the people around them through performing at a very high level and through overachieving. Now, I do think there is kind of a type A personality type, right? I do think that there are just genetically some diversity in personality types, and some people tend to be a little more content, with maybe a slower pace of life, and some people really want to be innovating and inventing and creating and trying new things. And I think that that's really great and really healthy. I am certainly one of those people. Like, my mind tends to run very fast, and I always want to learn new things and think about things in new ways. I think that's a part of my personality that is really wonderful and beneficial, but it also has gotten me in a lot of trouble historically because I have been that person that felt like I really had to be constantly performing at a high level to just tread water, right? To just be baseline okay. Now, this is something that gets turned into something more neurotic or pathological when it is combined with um, attachment trauma or a lot of stress or other kinds of trauma as well, right? So this personality type, I think in and of itself is really wonderful and healthy, and we need people like this, like leading innovation in our society, in our culture. But when you combine that with someone who maybe felt like love at home, growing up in their families was conditional, right? That they constantly had to be working hard to make sure that other people were happy, right? That they couldn't just exist and other people were okay. They really had to like constantly be achieving and showing like, look, I'm doing good things. Like, aren't you happy with me? Right? So love was very conditional at home. And this could be intentional or unintentional. A lot of parents don't intentionally do these kinds of things, but on a subconscious level, maybe this is communicated. And there are very formative years. So if there was a lot of stress or trauma or chaos, like life was very unsettled or chaotic at certain periods of childhood or, prepubescent kind of puberty age or high school age, this is going to cause these personalities to sometimes develop in more kind of neurotic or obsessive ways, again because the idea is that your worth or your ability to be loved is conditional on you being a high performer, right? So it's just this really unfortunate combination of a natural temperament and a certain environmental trigger. So really what we can see this as is that and this is based on theories of internal family systems, which was developed by a therapist named Richard Schwartz. And he really talked about how the psyche can kind of split into these different subpersonalities when you experience significant stress or trauma in your life. Now, this obviously in a very extreme situation would become like dissociative identity disorder. But most of the time it's not that extreme. And most people have some level of this kind of split where you have, different kind of sub personalities that come out in different contexts. So this is really normal. We all do this. It's just sometimes, again, it can become a little more neurotic or pathological if it is happening in the context of this kind of attachment trauma or perfectionism or people pleasing. And so what happens is it's not just that being highly motivated and focused, and, wanting to learn new things and do new things is just a part of your personality. It actually becomes a coping skill, right? It actually becomes a protective mechanism against the fear of your own lack of self-worth or your own lack of lovability. And we need to feel liked and loved in order to feel safe, right? Because we're social animals. We evolved in the context of small tribes and villages, right? And we are very social animals. We're primates. We're very social animals. We need each other to survive and to feel safe. And so being accepted by your family or your community, feeling liked, feeling loved unconditionally, right? Like you're just a part of the community, you're part of the family, that's non-negotiable. That is really important for our healthy development. And a lot of people, unfortunately, especially with all the intergenerational trauma, coming from like Victorian era and then the Great Depression and then World War II and then Vietnam. I mean, there's just so many things that have traumatized us just like on a mass scale, right? Like there's not really any families that have gone unscathed from these massive social traumas that have happened. And unfortunately, it's created a lot of dysfunctional patterns where people grow up without that kind of unconditional support or stability or love. And so these parts of us that are often attached to a part of our personality, right? Like overachieving, perfectionism, people pleasing, these become protectors, right? Because what these parts of us do is they tell us, look, I know you don't feel unconditionally loved, but we have to be loved to survive. So if you just overperform at everything you do, right? And you just become perfect, and you never make a mistake and you never show anyone your flaws and you just do all the things all the time, then the people around you will love you and everything will be okay. So it's protective. It's a gift of love, right? This part of our psyche kind of splits off, and this, high achieving part of us becomes very extreme and very dogmatic and says, look, we just have to do this to be loved. And if we don't, then we won't be loved, and then we're worthless, and then we might die. Right? That's basically what the logic behind it is, if you follow it all the way through. So that often works for a long time for people. And, I think there are those people who get very sick, when they are like, kids or teenagers or young adults and they've been sick for a very long time. But a lot of people kind of manage and push through for a long time as overachievers, as people pleasers, as perfectionists. Like I work with people who have been high level athletes or in high level careers, or, high performing academics for a long, long time and just burn themselves completely down. And this is actually a fight or flight state, right? This kind of extreme perfectionism, people pleasing, go, 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 right? That is, you are running, right? You are running from the fear of not being worthy, of not being loved. So it's not a lion that you're running from, right? It's this fear. And you are just go, 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 going. But of course, because it's like an abstract concept that you're running from, it's never going to go away, right? So now you're just running forever. You're never going to outrun this, like you would be able to a lion, hopefully. So eventually this is going to all come crashing down, right? Eventually it's not going to work anymore, whether it's just for, a few years or whether it's for decades, right? And I work with people who it's, worked both ways. I made it to 25 before it caught up with me. And then what happens is basically your body just can't anymore, right? And this is when the shame spiral stops, because you can't just be perfect anymore. And you get into this despair and this overwhelm. And you basically go into shutdown mode. Like your body goes into shutdown mode. And this is a freeze response, right? It's like, okay, well, I couldn't actually outrun my fear of not being loved or not being worthy. So that's it. I guess I'm just going to crumble and everything's going to fall apart, and I'm just going to freeze and hope that at some point it goes away and it ends, And a lot of times this is what happens when people finally get into severe chronic illness, right? But now they're stuck in this kind of frozen shame spiral, and sometimes people don't feel able to then have the motivation or even have the physical capacity to do the things that are going to pull them out of this shame shutdown spiral, and will actually allow them to heal, right? And so the person who requested this video was talking about feeling like anytime they even go a little bit off plan with their protocol, right? That kind of perfectionism thing, if they don't do everything exactly right, then they just have this shame spiral, right? Because it's like, well, I wasn't perfect, so what's the point? I might as well just shut the whole thing down, right? And another way this manifests, and people have talked to me about as well, and I really relate to this too, is like having to put all your overachieving on hold in order to heal. And I certainly had to do this, where it was like, you literally cannot be a perfectionist and overachieve and continue your career the way it is and continue your schedule the way it is and, overperform everything and heal, because it requires a lot of rest and a lot of downtime and a lot of quiet in order to often heal, right? And sometimes that can also be a shame spiral of like, oh my gosh, I used to be so functional. I used to do so much, even if it was making me sicker and sicker. And now I'm really slowing things down and I'm trying to work on healing. And now I'm stuck in this shame spiral and I feel despair and I'm feeling shut down and depressed, right? So it can happen any of those ways. But again, this is a survival mechanism kicking in, right? It's saying, well, you couldn't overachieve and just run away from this fear of not being worthy and not being loved forever. So now we're just going to shut down, and put you into this state of despair, So this is a protective mechanism too. It's also a protector, but it's a more extreme one, right? Even more than the first. So I think it's important to understand how this works on more of a psychological and nervous system level. So I hope that kind of helps you understand how these patterns happen and why. Okay, so what is the antidote to this? And of course, the antidote is a sense of innate self-worth. so much easier to just say it like that than to actually embody it, right? So I say that like it's simple. It's not. That's very hard, especially if you never properly developed self worth as a very young child. Actually, our primary self worth develops usually under the age of 2. This is when our very early development of self concept and self worth happens. So, yeah, a lot of this is really subconscious. Like most of us don't have memories before the age of 2, so it's really hard to go in. This is why talk therapy sometimes isn't effective, because you can't really go in and talk about something that just was like very subconsciously learned, like pre-verbal, pre-memory, you know. Of course, a lot of people can also through talk therapy identify key moments through the rest of their childhood, through their teen years, even through young adulthood, that were very formative in the development of their self-esteem. So I'm not saying it's not worth going to talk therapy and talking through some of this stuff. It certainly can be, but some of it is very, very deep in our body and in our subconscious. Now, some people will call self worth like your core self or your higher self, but really it's this idea of unconditional positive regard, right? And it's this concept, that a lot of different religious or spiritual traditions, around the world talk about, Buddhism in particular, but others as well, of innate goodness, right? Or at least that everyone has the capacity for redemption or for forgiveness, right? So this is certainly not an excuse. It's not like a get out of jail free card. It's not saying, well, everyone's innately good, so you can do whatever you want. No, of course, you have to be mindful about how your actions impact other people, right? But it's more about that regardless of the things that you do, you are a soul, right? You are a being, you are a core self, however you want to frame it. And there is innate goodness, potential for goodness, capacity for redemption, capacity for forgiveness within yourself. And the key to getting out of this cycle of perfectionism and shame that I'm talking about is to build on that foundation that may be very shaky for you or may not exist at all. So, sometimes it's hard for people to understand the concept of unconditional positive regard or unconditional self acceptance because they have felt like, well, I need some kind of negative consequence or punishment, or I'm not going to, do something, um, if I am not, afraid of not being liked or not being loved, then I'm not going to have the motivation, to do the things that I need to do in my life. And I think a lot of this is based on the fact that a lot of our parenting, in our culture, is based on punishment, right? Like a lot of us got timeouts or spankings or things like this, or threatened for, to have a privilege taken away or whatever it was. And again, I'm not saying that this is wrong or parents should never do this, but it does, if that is the only method of parenting used, it can build this idea that, like, oh, I just have to do this or else, right? Which feeds into that same pattern of like, oh, I better do these things all the time or I'm not going to be loved, I'm not going to be cared for, whereas if we were taught that it's important to do these things because it feels good to be a good person, right? Because there is a glow you get inside of you when you take care of yourself, when you eat well, when you're kind to other people, when you get up early and you do things that make your body feel good and strong, and when you're connected to other people because you're kind and you get that joy of connection to yourself, to your community. Like you do these things because it builds on that sense of I am a good person in a community of good people and we all take care of each other and we all take care of ourselves. That is far more powerful intrinsic motivation than I better do this because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't, right? Self-acceptance is actually the biggest catalyst to make changes. And again, I know that sounds paradoxical, but the more you criticize or judge or punish yourself, in order to try to make changes, the less sustainable those changes will generally be. Where if you are doing things out of motivation because you care about yourself so much and you know that you deserve certain things and you know that doing certain things will make you more connected and close to the kind of people that you want around you in your community, and you believe you deserve to be in that kind of community and live that kind of life, your changes are going to be like, I'm not going to say they're not going to be difficult, because of course all change is hard, but it's going to be so much more accessible and reachable, and easier to execute, right? Because you're doing it out of knowing that you already accept yourself fully. You already believe in your own self-worth, and intrinsic capability. So it is really not a paradoxical concept. And I think this is so important, such foundational work for people to do when they are trying to heal. Because, and this is why my first protocol in my book is Befriend, and on my histamine course as well is Befriend. Because if you are not befriending yourself and doing this out of self-love, it's not going to work, it's not going to take, it's not going to be sustainable, it's not going to have as much of an effect, right? Because your body knows when you're afraid. So, how do you start? Because going from crushing low self-esteem, if you are currently caught in that shame spiral, to, I'm doing this because I love myself and accept myself completely. I mean, that's a huge jump, right? And when you try to make that jump, that's probably not going to be doable, right? You're trying to like sprint across the Grand Canyon. It's not really the best approach. So, this is why in my support protocol 1, the Befriend protocol, I have people start just learning how to approach themselves neutrally. If you can at least take the outright negativity and judgment out, if you can just make neutral statements and start observing your own behaviors in a neutral way, and if you can focus just on the objective truth of situations, of your thoughts, right? Of the situations you find yourself in day to day. That is going to be the most effective first step, because neutrality is the first step to acceptance, right? So always start there. I've got a lot of, exercises written out in my book that can help you get there. But then you really have to start looking at your deeper belief systems, right? And if you really believe that people are only worthy in conditional ways because of how they perform or what they do, and maybe you don't believe this about other people, but you do believe it about yourself. And in that case, I would encourage you to take a hard look at why you think you are so special and different than everyone else on the planet, right? Eckhart Tolle says that ego can present itself as either being a narcissist, right? Like thinking you're the best person, or low self-worth, thinking you're the worst person, right? This is still ego, thinking that you are somehow special and different than anyone else, right? And in reality, we all have that intrinsic self-worth, that intrinsic goodness, that intrinsic ability to be redeemed and to be forgivable. And so letting go of that ego attachment to you being somehow different and inherently bad or unworthy in a way that is different from anyone else, this is really something to look at. So starting with neutrality, then going to those deeper beliefs you have about people and you have about yourself, and then you can start crawling towards the positive, right? Of actually believing that you are a fully worthy, lovable organism, just intrinsically the way you are without anything added on, right? Just like you would feel about a baby or a kitten or other kinds of people or organisms that you encounter on a day-to-day basis. And I will say these kinds of affirmations can feel painful. Like when I first started doing these kind of affirmations, like I felt almost like physically sick trying to say these positive things about myself, about my inherent self-worth. Like it made me want to like just throw up. But I kept doing them. And eventually I actually started believing it, right? And now I can like proclaim these incredibly positive, beautiful things about myself without even thinking twice. And I feel it in my body. I feel that glow, but it's because I pushed through that discomfort and I told those protective parts of myself, right? The shame, the perfectionist, right? The overachiever. I was like, look, I'm actually okay. I don't need your protection anymore, right? I'm dealing with the crisis that was underneath the development of you in the first place, right? I'm dealing with the deeper issue, and that is my inherent sense of self worth. And so when you actually allow those protectors just kind of sit down beside you, like you can just rest, you can go on vacation, you don't need to do your job all the time, right? And just start practicing. Just start practicing, and you might be surprised how quickly things start to shift. It doesn't mean you're going to feel that way all the time. I still, of course, have days where I fall back into those old patterns, and I have to really catch myself and check myself and push myself to approach things with a new mindset again. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you are working through that first support protocol in my book or on my histamine course. I find that people sometimes just start noticing changes in their symptoms just from that before even doing anything with their diet or detox practices or anything like that. So, I encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't, and feel free to comment or email me with other requests for videos. Okay, have a great week, you guys.